figured we should probably explain where we have been because we kind of disappeared for a little while. If you have been following along on our Instagram or our YouTube pages, you will know that on the morning of April 28th, I woke up with what I thought was just a stiff neck. Throughout the day, it kept getting worse and worse to the point that I was driving home from work and was literally crying every time I hit a bump because it hurt so badly. Went home, took a hot shower, put on clean pajamas, took some pain medication, and thought, all right, I just slept weird the night before, this will be fine. In fact, it was not fine. The next morning, my husband found me in the bathroom crying, shaking, freezing cold, clutching my chest, and my pulse was racing. A couple of years ago, I lost one of my best friends, to a heart attack. And afterwards, I researched how differently heart attacks can present in women. And at that time, I had all of the symptoms. So my husband basically told me I was either going to go to the ER with him or we would arrive in an ambulance. And I decided the ER with him sounded like the better option. Because I kept grabbing my chest, the doctors immediately started running tests to make sure I wasn't having a heart attack. Over the next few days, felt like I went over every scan, test, and procedure imaginable. One of those tests was a chemical stress test, which was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. At one point, while I was gasping for air, I genuinely thought, well, this is it. So when my heart tests all came back clear, they ordered an MRI. I had never had an MRI before, so naturally I asked approximately 12,000 questions. The nursing staff was wonderful and explained everything very clearly. I also requested some relaxing medication because if you think I was going into an MRI tube emotionally unmedicated, you would be incorrect. Then they asked if I wanted music. I picked one of my favorites, Josh Ritter, which was lovely, except apparently I was enjoying myself a little too much because at one point they literally had to come over the PA system and tell me to stop moving and vibing with the music. So somewhere in the middle of all this medical chaos, I got scolded during an MRI for having too much Josh Ritter enthusiasm. If you've never heard Josh Ritter, I definitely recommend checking out his album, Hello Starling. It's one of my favorites. And then, well, things felt like they went completely off the rails. By that point, my husband had come back into the room, and the doctor walked in and told us they had found a serious issue with my spine. He explained that my spinal cord was being compressed to the point that I could become paralyzed within 1 to 2 years, and I needed emergency surgery to prevent any further damage from happening to my spinal cord. I remember him saying that it needed to happen immediately, and he didn't think I should leave the hospital between the time of this diagnosis and the surgery. And that was the moment everything became real, and I started crying, and I honestly kept crying because I realized I was the exact same age my mom was when she started having major spinal procedures and other medical problems. For the rest of her life, it felt like she was always chasing the next procedure, hoping it would finally make her feel better. And I was absolutely terrified that I was stepping into that same future. That night, my husband and I sat there and held hands and talked about why this felt so terrifying. The next day, Megan came to visit. And in typical nerdy girl fashion, brought me lovely pajamas, robe, a book, and some flowers. And while we were talking and knitting, the surgeon came back into the room and said that it seems like what I said yesterday really triggered something. Let's talk through it. And honestly, I'll always appreciate that moment and the fact that Megan was there, because Megan knew the story about my mom and helped explain why I was reacting the way I was. The surgeon sat down and carefully explained us through everything. He explained that I would need a fusion from C2 to T1, and that the reason they were recommending such a large fusion was because it would ultimately be the strongest and most stable solution. And for the first time, I started to feel a little less afraid. I ended up staying in the hospital for about a week before surgery, and that week was emotionally very strange. On one hand, we were preparing for a massive spinal surgery. On the other hand, we were still very much still ourselves, when eventually surgery day arrived. I had to be there at 5:30 in the morning for a 7:30 surgery. I brought a book, The Correspondent, and tried to stay calm. I specifically requested the ultrasound IV team because I did not want to get poked 14 times looking for a vein. And then there was a lot of waiting, and even more waiting, trying not to think too hard about what was to happen. And then suddenly it was time. I remember wishing I could bring my dogs in as therapy dogs, because honestly, I just wanted one more good snuggle with my puppy before surgery. My father showed up that morning too. He had just gotten back from his honeymoon and absolutely did not have to be there. But he was, and he meant the world to me. Excuse me. And then it was time to go back to surgery. And there is something deeply terrifying about being rolled down that hallway towards the surgery room. It's the moment when everything becomes real. And then I remember nothing until I woke up in recovery, talking with my nurse, and everyone was wonderful. I have to give a big shout out to the transport staff at the hospital, because they are absolutely the unsung heroes of the hospital, moving patients from room to room and floor to floor every single day. I asked one woman how many steps she got in a day. She said somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 steps in a single day. If I wasn't in a wheelchair, I probably would have fallen over. When I finally got to my room, my family was all there. We hugged, we cried, and, well, I cried some more. Partly because I was in pain, but mostly because I had made it through. The thing I had spent weeks being terrified of was finally behind me. People kept asking me when I knew I was going to be okay. And honestly, it wasn't after the MRI. It wasn't after the surgery. It wasn't even when the surgeon told me and my family that everything had gone well. It was the first time I stood up with the walker and walked down the hallway. My sister took a picture to commemorate that fun event. And then it was time to eat, and that turkey dinner was some of the best hospital food my sister, husband, and I had ever had. We demolished it like wild wolves. Then it was time to take another walk, and my sister took another picture because I was so ridiculously excited that I had done it. Normally, I'm very critical of photos of myself and won't share most of them. I critique everything about my body, but in those photos, I don't see any of that. All I see is my smile, and I absolutely love my smile because it's pure relief, it's hope, it's me realizing that maybe, just maybe, I was going to get my life back. Another one of my favorite photos from this entire experience is my face once they disconnected my IV and I could walk independently with the walker, which sounds like a strange thing to celebrate until you've spent days connected to machines. But in that exact moment, it felt like freedom. Recovery has not been easy. There have been tears, there have been pain medications, there has been learning to walk with a walker, not only in your house, but outside, in stores, on sidewalks that are full of cracks. There may absolutely have been a medically questionable dance party. There have been books. There has been yarn. There has been attempted crochet. And through it all, I've been incredibly lucky. I've had family who showed up. I've had friends who sat with me through the scary parts. I've had a medical team that listened. I've had books and knitting and crochet projects that remind me who I am outside of being a patient. And I've had all of you. So if you've been wondering where we've been, this is where we've been. Recovery. One day, one step, and occasionally one skein at a time. Now, despite all evidence to the contrary, I did not spend this last several weeks entirely focused on my cervical fusion. There was also some yarn. And one of the highlights of recovery was receiving my Pineapple Yarns Sun Club package for this month. And honestly, if serotonin could be dyed and twisted into a skein, this might be it. I've spent a lot of the last few weeks feeling like a Victorian invalid in a neck brace, and then this absolutely joyful yellow yarn showed up and reminded me that life still contains tiny bits of magic. I also have picked up the Granny Square Bible because one of my goals this year is to become a more confident crocheter. Knitting still feels like home and my best craft, but I'd love to expand my crochet skills. Now, full disclosure, because of the whole spinal fusion adventure situation I currently find myself in, I've mostly just admired it and flipped through a few pages. I haven't yet found my first, I absolutely have to make this right now square, but there are definitely a few contenders. And because we've missed a little time, we're going to save the full book blanket discussion for our next regular episode. We'll be talking about our April book, My Husband's Wife, our May book, Ruthless Creatures, which deserves approximately 5 pepper spices. It's a hot one. And our June selection, Yesteryear. We'll share our ratings, our blanket squares, and the yarn colors we chose for each book. And perhaps most importantly, we were able to go to YarnCon. There was yarn, there was enabling, there may have been some questionable purchasing decisions, and there is absolutely no way we can fit all of that into this episode with me alone. So, our next full episode will be dedicated to our YarnCon haul and all of the wonderful fiber-related choices we've made in the last several weeks. Thank you to everyone who checked in, sent messages, shared prayers, good thoughts, book recommendations, and yarn recommendations. Recovery has been a lot harder than I expected, but it's also reminded me how lucky I am to be surrounded by wonderful people. We're not quite back to normal yet, but we're getting there, and we're looking forward to spending more time with all of you. So until next time, keep reading, keep crafting, and stay nerdy.